My name is Roy Benavidez, and I was born with nothing. No myths, no money, no easy road, just a name and a dream that seemed too far to reach. I came into this world in Cuero, Texas, in 1935, a small town that forgot what hope looked like. My parents were Mexican-American farm workers. We didn't have much, but we had each other. That was before death came early. When I was 7, my father died of tuberculosis. Not long after, my mother followed. So there I was, just a skinny brown boy, barefoot in the Texas dirt, staring at 2 graves, wondering why God took everything from me. My uncle and aunt took me in, along with my siblings. We lived in a tiny house made of wood and prayers, the kind where you could hear the wind whistle through the cracks at night. I remember working the fields before sunrise, picking cotton, pulling sugar beets, sweating under that unforgiving sun. While other kids were playing, I was learning to survive. People looked at us like we were less than human. I couldn't even buy food at some stores because of the color of my skin. They called us names, told us we'd never be anything. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was just another lost boy from nowhere. But even then, I had something burning inside me, something that whispered, "You were meant for more." When I was old enough, I joined the Texas National Guard. It was 1952. I was 17, restless and angry. I didn't know what I wanted from life, but I knew I needed to fight for something, maybe even for myself. I still remember the first time I put on that uniform. It wasn't just fabric, it was pride. It was the first time in my life I felt equal. No one cared where you came from, only if you could stand your ground. But joining the military wasn't a miracle. It was hard, brutal even. They yelled, they broke us down, and they built us again. And I loved it. I learned discipline. I learned what it meant to have brothers who'd bleed beside you. For the first time in my life, I belonged. Then came Vietnam. The first time I heard that word, it sounded like another world. Dense jungles, hidden enemies, a war nobody understood. I went once, as a soldier, and what I saw there changed me forever. The first deployment was rough. Hot, humid, endless rain, and a constant smell of death in the air. You'd wake up not knowing if you'd live through the day. But something worse than the bullets got me. A landmine. One wrong step, and I was thrown into darkness. I survived, but the doctors said I'd never walk again. They told me to accept it, to prepare for a desk job. But I didn't want pity. I wanted redemption. I was 26 years old, sitting in that hospital bed, legs useless, pride shattered. Every night, I prayed, "God, just give me one more chance." And then came May 2nd, 1968, the day that would change my life forever. It started like any other morning. The air was thick and heavy, like the jungle itself was warning us to stay away. I was at base when we got the call. A Special Forces recon team, 12 men, had been ambushed deep inside enemy territory near Loc Ninh, near the Cambodian border. They were surrounded, heavily outnumbered, cut off. Most of them were already down. No one expected them to make it out alive. But as soon as I heard the radio call, something inside me snapped. Those are my brothers. And I wasn't about to sit and listen while they died. I grabbed my gear, my medical bag, my knife, and ran toward the helicopter pad. Someone shouted, "Benavidez, you're not assigned to this mission." I didn't care. All I said was, "They need me." And before anyone could stop me, I jumped on that chopper, straight into hell. The chopper shook like it knew what was waiting for us below. I gripped the handles so tight my knuckles turned white. The smell of fuel mixed with sweat and fear. I looked down and saw the thick jungle canopy, the trees swaying in the wind like silent witnesses. Our team was heading straight into a nightmare. We knew it, but we went anyway. The radio crackled. Team in contact. Multiple casualties. Enemy closing in. I felt my chest tighten. Every training drill, every late-night run, every pain I'd endured, it all led to this moment. I couldn't fail. I wouldn't fail. When we touched down, the helicopter skidded along the dirt. The rotors sliced through the air, tearing branches, kicking up dust and debris. I jumped out, my boots hitting the soft mud. Immediately, bullets whizzed past my head like angry hornets. I crawled toward the firefight, heart pounding, adrenaline burning through every vein. I saw them, my brothers, pinned down, bleeding, barely alive. One by one. Lieutenant, sergeant, private, some motionless, some screaming. The enemy had them surrounded. I could hear their cries, calling out for help, for someone, anyone, to save them. And I was that someone. I ran into the open, ignoring the bullets ripping through the air. I didn't even think about the fact that I'd already been wounded in previous battles. I didn't think about the pain. All I saw was my brothers. I reached the first soldier. He had been shot in the chest. I dropped beside him, dragging him to cover. I ripped open my medical bag and began patching his wounds, talking to him, telling him to hold on. Stay with me, brother. You're going to make it. But as I looked around, I realized the situation was worse than I imagined. The enemy was everywhere, shooting from the trees, hiding in the thick brush, grenades landing like raindrops. It wasn't just a fight. It was a storm of death. Then it happened. A bullet tore into my shoulder. Pain exploded through me, white hot and blinding. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Another round grazed my leg, tearing through muscle. I stumbled, fell, and rolled over the mud. I could feel the warmth of blood spreading through my uniform. Somewhere inside me, I heard a voice. You either save them or you die trying. I chose to keep moving. I reached another soldier, barely conscious, soaked in blood. I lifted him onto my back. Bullets tore past us like angry hornets, the enemy shouting in a language I didn't understand. I ran from tree to tree, from bush to bush, dragging him inch by inch towards safety. Every step felt like eternity. Every breath felt like fire. I was hit again, in the leg, the arm, a glancing shot to the face. I didn't notice. I didn't care. I kept going, one brother at a time. I refused to leave anyone behind. Somewhere in the chaos, a helicopter appeared above us, the extraction team. I waved frantically, trying to get their attention. Then I saw it. Another soldier lying in the open, screaming for help. I could have jumped on the chopper, saved myself. But I couldn't leave him. I ignored the bullets slicing past me, ignored the pain, ignored everything but that man. I reached him, grabbed him, and pulled him toward cover. Then I felt it, a grenade. I didn't know if it hit, but the world seemed to explode around me. I blacked out for a moment, the sound of screaming and gunfire filling my ears. When I came to, I was still alive. I was still moving. I was still dragging my brothers out of that hell. I lost count of the soldiers I saved that day. Some were walking with me. Some were barely breathing. And some I couldn't save. But I refused to stop. Even when my body was shredded, my face swollen, my vision blurred. Even when they told me later that I had been hit 37 times. I refused to die in that jungle. I refused to leave my brothers behind. Because that's what a soldier does. You fight. You protect. You survive. And even if survival feels impossible, you find a way. When the helicopters finally pulled us out, I was barely conscious. I remember looking down at my hands, covered in blood, my own and others. I thought about everything I had endured. Every childhood struggle, every hospital bed, every painful step back to walking. All of it led to that moment. I had walked into hell and walked out carrying the lives of my brothers. And I would do it again, without hesitation, without fear, without doubt. Because courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward even when the world is trying to kill you. I woke up to white light. Too bright. Too sterile. I couldn't move. Every part of me hurt. My body felt like it had been run over by a tank. And in some ways it had. I remember trying to speak, but my throat was dry, raw. A nurse leaned over me, and I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the glass. I barely recognized myself. Blood, dirt, and exhaustion had claimed my face. Shrapnel scars decorated my arms. I could barely lift my hands to see them all. The doctor said the word that made my stomach turn. Miracle. They said it was impossible that I had survived. I had been hit 37 times, bullets, shrapnel, even a grenade. They said most men would have died on that battlefield. I laughed bitterly. I didn't feel like a miracle. I felt like a ghost. I spent weeks in the hospital, recovering, learning to live with my wounds. Every day was a battle in itself. Every step was a fight against my own body. Every night, nightmares dragged me back to the jungle, back to the screams, back to the smell of blood. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't stop seeing the faces of the men I couldn't save. I felt guilty, even though I knew I had done everything I could. The Army sent officers to talk to me. They wanted to tell me how proud they were. They called me a hero. They told me my bravery had saved lives. I wanted to believe them, but inside I felt hollow. How do you explain to someone that the moment you were your strongest was also the moment you almost died? My brothers called to check on me. The ones I had saved. They told me thank you. They told me I had given them a second chance at life. And in their voices, I heard something I hadn't felt in years. Purpose. For the first time, I understood why I had survived. It wasn't about glory. It wasn't about medals. It was about them. It was about saving lives, even when it seemed impossible. Eventually, I received orders to report to Fort Sam Houston for debriefing. I was honored with the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest award for valor. I remember standing on the stage, hearing the applause, seeing the flag waving behind me. I wanted to smile, to feel proud, but my body ached, my heart ached, and my soul still carried the jungle with it. The president shook my hand. He told me, "Your courage and sacrifice will never be forgotten." I nodded. I wanted to say, "Don't forget the others too," because I knew the story wasn't about me alone. It was about the men who didn't make it. It was about the sacrifice, the pain, the brotherhood. Recovery wasn't just physical. The scars on my body healed, slowly, painfully. But the scars in my mind were harder to mend. I would wake up screaming from nightmares. I would see blood in my dreams. I would relive that jungle over and over again. Doctors told me I had post-traumatic stress. I didn't know the words back then, but I knew the feeling. I was trapped in a war that didn't end. A war inside my own head. Some nights I wanted to give up. Some nights I wanted the pain to stop. But every time I thought about my brothers, alive, because of me, I remembered one thing. I had been given a second chance. I had refused to die once, and I would refuse again. I dedicated my life to others after that. I visited hospitals. I worked with veterans. I told my story, not for fame, but to remind people what courage truly meant. It wasn't about medals. It wasn't about recognition. It was about heart. It was about refusing to quit. Even when everything seemed lost, I refused to die. And that's when I realized survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about living for something greater than yourself. It's about carrying forward the lives you saved, the people you loved, and the lessons you learned in the fire. That's the story I carry. That's the story I will tell as long as I live. The war ended, but the fight never truly left me. I came home, a Medal of Honor pinned to my chest, but my body still ached. My mind carried the jungle with it. Some people expected me to smile, to celebrate, to live happily ever after. But the truth was, returning home after Vietnam wasn't a victory. It was complicated. I saw a country divided, a nation that celebrated soldiers and ceremonies, but often ignored the ones who came back with invisible scars. I saw men struggling, women waiting, children growing up with fathers who couldn't speak of what they'd seen. I could have let bitterness consume me. I could have turned my back on the world and lived quietly. But I didn't. Instead, I decided to live for others. I wanted to give back, to make every wound, every scar, every nightmare meaningful. I began visiting hospitals, veterans' hospitals, rehabilitation centers, anywhere men and women fought to survive. I would walk into a room and see a young soldier, staring at the floor, silent, broken. And I would tell them, "I know the pain you feel. I've been there. But you can survive. You can rise. You can fight again." I share my story, not for glory, not for medals, but to give hope. Over the years, I watched the next generation of soldiers grow. I trained with them, spoke to them, and reminded them that courage isn't about the battlefield. Courage is about refusing to give up, even when your body and mind scream for you to stop. It's about heart. I remember one young man, barely out of high school, who had been in an explosion in Iraq. He looked at me with fear in his eyes. I put my hand on his shoulder and said, "Son, pain is temporary. Honor is forever. You can do this." He survived. He thrived. And I knew then that my life's purpose wasn't just about my own survival. It was about inspiring others to keep living, to key. I received countless invitations to speak at schools, civic organizations, and military ceremonies. Each time, I would tell my story in the first person, exactly how it happened without embellishment. People would ask me, "How did you survive?" I would always answer, "I survived because I refused to die. I survived because I believed in my brothers. I survived because I refused to give up, even when everything seemed lost." And it wasn't just my story. It was the story of every soldier who stood up in the face of impossible odds. Every medic who ran in a fire to save a friend. Every man and woman who refused to leave anyone behind. That's the legacy of valor. In my later years, I returned to Cuero, Texas, the small town where my journey began. I walked the streets I used to know, the fields I once worked in, the dirt roads, the trees, the memories of childhood struggle. They all reminded me where I came from. And I realized something profound. No medal, no honor, no recognition could ever define me. What defined me was every choice I made to stand up, to fight, to survive, and to save others along the way. I had been left behind in Vietnam, but I refused to stay behind in life. I carried forward, and I carried them forward with me. I met countless people whose lives were changed because I refused to die that day. Soldiers, families, communities, they all carried a piece of that courage with them. And that's the true measure of a life worth living. Not the medals, not the applause, not the ceremonies, but the lives you touch, the hope you give, the hearts you inspire. I am Roy Benavidez. I fought. I survived. I refused to die. And I lived to make a difference. Life has a way of testing you. Not once, not twice, but over and over again. I've learned that courage isn't just a moment in battle. It's a choice, a daily choice, to face fear, to face pain, to face the unknown, and refuse to back down. When I think back to that day in Vietnam, I remember every sound, every smell, every heartbeat. I remember the screaming, the chaos, the explosions, and the faces of the men I saved. But more than that, I remember a simple truth. Even in the darkest hell, there is a spark of hope, a spark of life, a spark that refuses to die. I've spent the years after the war sharing that spark, visiting hospitals, speaking to young soldiers, mentoring those who felt lost. I've seen fear transform into courage. I've seen despair turn into hope. I've seen broken men rise again because someone refused to leave them behind. That's the legacy I carry. Not medals, not parades, not recognition, but lives touched, hearts inspired, courage awakened. I have thought often about death, about the possibility that my time might come suddenly. But I'm not afraid, because I know that living fully with heart and purpose is the greatest victory anyone can achieve. And when I'm gone, I hope people remember this. It is not the battles you win that define you. It is the battles you refuse to surrender to. It is the love you show your brothers and sisters in the fire of life. It is the courage to move forward when every part of you wants to stop. I was left behind in Vietnam, but I refused to die. And in refusing, I found life. I found purpose. I found legacy. So I tell you now, wherever you are, do not give up. Do not surrender to fear. Do not let the world tell you your life isn't worth fighting for. Fight. Fight for others. Fight for yourself. And fight to leave the world better than you found it. That is what I lived for. That is what I fought for. That is what I leave behind. I am Roy Benavidez. I fought. I survived. I refused to die. And now, my story is yours.